Howdy everyone, welcome to Texas A&M's Virtual Campus Sustainability Month. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We have Thomas Jistel. He's going to talk to us about natural disasters and how those impact low-income communities differently. He's going to look at issues of climate change, and you've probably know that natural disasters are increasing, that climate change has caused those to really increase in recent years, but you may not realize that low-income communities are impacted differently. Not everyone experiences natural disasters the same way. So Thomas is going to talk to us a little bit about that and should be really interesting. Before we get to that, just want to go over some of our kind of ground rules. So the first thing I want you to be aware of is that I would like you to turn your I want you to turn your settings on to side-by-side mode. That's going to give you the best viewing experience. If you go up to the top bar, there's on the top right, it's going to give you the option to do that. You can also turn on subtitles if that's going to help you view this better. You're able to, we also ask you to please mute your mics. And if you have questions during this conversation, please drop those in the chat. We will have a discussion afterwards with Thomas. And the more questions you ask, the better that conversation is going to be. So drop those in the chat throughout. And you can also use the raise hand feature if you wanted to say something. And at the very end, while we're in the discussion, you can also just show us, you can turn on your camera or unmute your mic, and you can just ask a question as well. There's not going to be a whole lot of us on the call, so that shouldn't be a problem. And then a couple things with the office. We have Sustainability Champion Awards. Those are on October. Those are going to open actually on October 19th. It's a great way to get recognized for what you're doing on campus to be more sustainable, or you can nominate someone. Students, faculty, and staff are all eligible. There's a separate award for each. And the internship program that we offer in our office, Thomas is one of those interns. That is going to open on October 26th for applications. So be on the lookout for that in your email or on our social media channels at Sustainable TAMU. And currently, the Aggie Green Fund also has the opportunity to apply for micro grants or major grants. So please check that out at greenfund.tamu.edu. And you may also be here for the prizes. So let's see how that's going to work. Sorry, my slides are just a little slow on the up. Okay, there we go. So I want you, during this course of this presentation, there's going to be a code word. And that could be spoken by Thomas. It could be written out on a slide. I might say, drop it in the chat. And so there's different ways that you could hear this code word. And when you hear it, I want you to write it down, keep track of it. And that's going to be used to get some prizes. So if you collect 2 code words in each presentation, there's 1 code word, you get a water bottle. 3 code words get you a t-shirt. And you can see on the screen, you can have a gray t-shirt or a dark gray t-shirt. And if you get 5 code words, you can have the t-shirt and the water bottle. So once you've collected all your code words, we ask you to email sustainability@tamu.edu. Just send 1 email with all your code words collected. You have all the way until November 9th to collect your prizes or to claim your prize. And then we will ask that you pick up your prize on the College Station campus. So unfortunately, we're not able to ship those. You need to be here locally to pick those up. And you don't have to watch live. You can watch the recorded version of this, and you can still get your code word. So that's the last thing that I wanted to go over. I'm going to now pass it over to Thomas, and he's going to start sharing his screen, and he'll take it away. So whenever you're ready, Thomas.
Well, thank you, Ben, for the introduction. Like you said, I'm Thomas Jistel. I'm a senior public health major with a sociology minor, and I've been with the Sustainability Internship Program for 2 semesters now. And my talk today is titled How Natural Disasters Impact Low-Income Communities. And so first thing I wanted to do is kind of give an introduction. I study sociology with my minor, so I wanted to give an introduction on why there is inequality in the first place and how that inequality affects poor people. And so that kind of starts with, what is economic inequality? And it's basically the unequal distribution of wealth and the opportunities to attain wealth. And so there are a large number of factors that can go into this, one of which is your education. So whether you were whether you went to a good preschool, that actually has a great impact on your future career and your future education, and whether you whether you graduated high school or graduated college, those also increase your chances of gaining more wealth over your lifetime. And also your zip code, so where you physically live. In public health, we talk about zip codes being a very big determinant in your health. So different zip codes have different, funding options for transportation, for overall health access, and for overall job opportunities. And another factor is your gender, race, or ethnicity. So minorities tend to get paid less even for doing the same jobs. And we see that with racial wage gaps and the gender wage gap. And in general, you can easily think or measure economic inequality by measuring wealth. And that's basically all your assets minus your debts. So all your income, your salary, your investments minus everything you owe someone. And often when we talk about economic inequality, it's like the 1% versus like everyone else. And so I included this little graphic here that's kind of like the 99% versus the 1%. And we'll see if that comparison is actually true in the coming slides. So there are three primary ways Americans build wealth. One is through inheritance. So like what happens when your grandmother, passes away? Like, do you get any money, or do they even have money to give you in the first place? And this is a primary way that very wealthy families in the United States stay wealthy, is through inheritance. Another way is through homeownership, and we'll talk about the implications of natural disasters and homeownership a little bit later in the presentation, but usually property values tend to increase, and that increases their family wealth. And lastly is your overall income. So how much do you make in salaried wages every year? And so with that being said, we're going to dive into a little bit more detail about income inequality. And so here I have the poverty lines in 1979 to 2018. And so in 1979, the poverty line was around $21,000 a year. And right now in 2018, it's at $25,000. So that's about a 20% increase. So keep that number in mind when I show you this next graph. And so this was taken from the Social Security Administration, and it's basically averages of income each year, and they're distributed among like economic classes. And so the first number I wanted y'all to take a look at is that the bottom 90% in 1979 made an average of $30,000 a year. And you can see in 2018, they made an average of about $37,000 a year. And so that's about a 24% increase. So they're slightly staying above like increasing growth compared to the poverty line. And then, however, when you look at the upper 1% and more specifically the upper 0.1%, their averages were around $600,000 a year in 1979. However, now it's around $2.8 million a year. And so that is a 340% increase over the same time period. And so when people talk about like wages aren't growing and like people are becoming billionaires like way too easily, this is usually what people mean, is that the top 1% and the top 0.01%, their wages are increasing significantly faster than everyone else's. And, is it ethically fair that people at the very top who are already wealthy and already say like significantly wealthy, that their incomes grow at 4.5 times as much as everyone else's, their wages at the same time only grew by like 1.2 times as much? And that brings us to like, why should you also care about poor people, and why should you care about inequality, even if it doesn't directly affect you? Well, studies have shown that societies with greater economic inequality actually have weaker economies. And so basically what that boils down to is that people at the bottom would like to spend money, but oftentimes they don't have the economic resources to spend money on things that they want to buy. And so if you're spending all your money on your rent, on your childcare, on your healthcare, and on food, like a lot of poor people don't have any discretionary spending money, and so they can't spend that extra money in the economy because they literally don't have it. And so that can lead to a less resilient economy. And we see that when governments give out stimulus checks, they're trying to get people to spend money. And so that kind of goes along with having a weaker economy. And there's also no retirement and no savings. So we often hear that poor people should just save money, but if they're spending all their money on rent and childcare and healthcare, they don't have enough money basically to put in savings. And in fact, 47% of Americans in 2018 could not afford a $400 expense without going into debt, and that's from the Federal Reserve. And so I found that pretty shocking that almost half of Americans can't afford to go to the doctor if something is wrong, or fix their car if something happens. And lastly, there are also increased health risks with being poor. So you're less likely to have health insurance, or you're more likely to be underinsured. So you can't go to the doctor and see a doctor regularly, or even if something's wrong. And you're also more likely to be impacted by numerous infectious diseases like the flu and even COVID-19. And however, with infectious diseases, like, they don't care about class. Like, even wealthy people can get infected by infectious diseases. So it's really important that we take care of the healthcare of all people in society to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. And we're seeing that with COVID-19 this year. And you're also more at risk for non-infectious diseases. So poor people are more likely to be diabetic, more likely to be exposed to cancerous materials, and more likely to smoke and drink as well. And so that kind of plays into climate change. As climate change increases and gets worse, there are going to be more people affected by it, and there will be more health risks associated with it. And like Ben said earlier, there isn't a frequency of natural disasters increasing as climate change happens, and the severity of storms and disasters will also increase. And more people across the United States and across the entire world will also be affected by climate change. And in fact, only 3 of the 3,141 United States counties didn't report any natural disaster damages since 2000. So basically, over the past 20 years, almost every single county in the United States has had some form of natural disaster in their county. And so that just goes to show the widespread impacts of climate change and natural disasters, specifically in the United States. And that just goes to show also the cost increasing of climate change every year. And so with hurricanes, those are some of the most visible ways of climate change. 2017 was one of the costliest seasons on record, with 3 of the 17 named storms in the Atlantic Ocean hurricane season costing $265 billion in damages. And one of those storms was Hurricane Harvey, which cost $125 billion, and that impacted Houston and East Texas here. And a lot of people said that 2017 was like a 1 in 100 year hurricane season. Well, people are saying that again 3 years later in 2020. And 2020 is on pace to smash the number of named storms. So in 2005, the current record holder is at 27 named storms. However, in October of that year, they had about 20 at the time. However, as of last week, we had over 24. So some models and some estimates are placing us at a record number of 30 to 32 named storms in the Atlantic Ocean this year. And this is also record year for wildfires. California has seen 5 of its 6 largest wildfires in this year alone, and it seems like every year we hear about California wildfires being really bad, but that just goes to show you that this year is significantly worse. And in fact, in September, roughly 900,000 acres burned in less than 3 days along the West Coast, and that's roughly the size of Rhode Island. So that's pretty crazy to think about. The area of an entire state was burned within 3 days. And wildfires also have a number of health impacts. So what we call in public health, particulate matter 2.5. It's basically really fine dust that you breathe in, and it usually comes from smoke. So wildfires obviously cause a lot of smoke. And those health implications of that particulate matter inhalation leads way to chronic lung diseases, to asthma risks, and to lung cancer down the road. And it also causes a lot of physical damage to cities. There are estimates from anywhere to 70,000 to 130,000 people along the West Coast in the United States this year were evacuated from their homes due to wildfires. And all these health impacts and the social impacts of wildfires disproportionately impact low-income communities because they're already at risk for other chronic health conditions, like I mentioned earlier. And I found this really interesting too. This is a map taken, or a picture taken from space in September. And if you can see all the little gray wispy clouds, that's actually all smoke. And so this all has that particulate matter that people are breathing in. And so people, as far as Texas, actually were breathing in this wildfire smoke from California. And so that just goes to show the widespread impacts of these wildfires across the United States. And that even here in Texas, like we're still breathing in that smoke and that air caused by the California wildfires. And so how does economic inequality relate to natural disasters? And like I said earlier, homeownership is one of the primary ways Americans build wealth. And so when your home gets damaged or your business or your community infrastructure is damaged, that causes a loss of wealth to you, your family, and your community. And that cycles inequality and that cycles poverty within a community. And so depending on the size and scope of the storm, it can actually stop an entire local economy. And we saw this happen with Hurricane Maria and Puerto Rico. So half of Puerto Ricans lived below the federal poverty line in 2017. And what that basically meant is that they didn't have any discretionary money to rebuild their communities after Hurricane Maria hit. And this picture is actually taken from a neighborhood in Puerto Rico. And as you can kind of tell, a lot of the houses were completely destroyed and a lot of the businesses were too. And so Puerto Rico solely relied on federal funding in their United States territory. So they receive federal funding. And a lot of their funding is still in congressional limbo right now. About $3 billion of federal relief for Hurricane Maria is still being debated in Congress right now. And in addition to that, there's also FEMA support and an increase in inequality. So studies have shown that costly or damage events perpetuate inequality, and that the more federal support a county gets, the higher inequality rises. And that's more significant when you break down by other social factors such as race, education, and home ownership. So if you can look at these graphs, white people tend to have their wealth increase when counties report more property damage. And this is because white people tend to have a greater access to federal funds and federal applications for funding than minorities people do. And the same goes with educated people as well. And this is actually extrapolated even more when you look at white educated homeowners versus Black less educated renters. When county damage is really low, only reported at $100,000, there's not a great change in inequality or in familial wealth. However, as storms and natural disasters are more costly to an area, the inequality and wealth gaps actually grow between families. And so what are some solutions to solving this inequality in relations to natural disasters? Well, one policy is called Build Back Better, and it started in Japan and is being spread across Western Europe right now. And its focus is on restoring communities to resist the natural disasters that caused the damage in the first place. So if a hurricane came through and destroyed a bunch of homes, we would rebuild those homes to withstand future hurricanes. And with those rebuilding processes, we would also implement sustainable infrastructure. So making sure the buildings materials are carbon neutral, making sure the homes end up being carbon neutral when people live in them, using recycled materials, and other sustainable infrastructure like that. And another focus is that we're not eliminating poor people from the areas that they used to live in. So this is not gentrification. There's a focus on keeping the families that used to live in these areas that keep them there and living there, even though we're improving their community. And that also goes along with community investment. So distributing funds with equity in mind over equality, and that poor communities tend to need more financial help after natural disasters. And an example of this is during Hurricane Harvey, everyone that applied to get funds from FEMA for aid relief, almost everyone got $2,500 checks. However, you had to reapply to get more money from FEMA. And so a lot of minority neighborhoods only got their first check because they weren't able to reapply for whatever reason. And so that disproportionately impacted low-income communities and actually, decreased the wealth like in the previous graphs. And we can also implement, better oversight for spending, making sure people are actually rebuilding their homes up to the proper structures and they're actually spending their relief money on essential items. And finally, this kind of goes to individual preparedness. So making sure your community and your family and yourself has a plan for natural disasters. So if you live in an area prone to wildfires, making sure that your family knows where to go during an evacuation event, making sure your family is prepared for these basic events. And that's part of what we talk about in public health too. And in addition to that, one of the things we talk about is a go bag. And so it basically has these 9 essential items that I have on this slide. And if you type in go bag and you're looking to purchase one, they're about $400 and upwards of 1,000. So don't go buy one online. You can actually find all of these items at a dollar store or at Walmart, and you can probably get all of them for less than $100. And so that kind of goes along with like preparing low-income communities, like everyone should have a go bag, everyone should have essential items in case they have to evacuate, your neighborhood or your community or your house. And this website, ready.gov, is funded through FEMA, and they actually tell you how to make a preparedness plan, and they tell you how to make a go bag as well. And finally, here's a few of my sources that I found most important or most interesting. Obviously, I had a lot more, so you can contact me if you want more of my sources. And I also, at the bottom, I have the ready.gov website in case you wanted to save that. But other than that, are there any questions for me?
All right, great. Thank you so much, Thomas. I learned a lot as usual. Right now we have a comment in the chat that says great presentation. So I don't see any questions just yet. I have a couple questions I can ask you. So the first thing that I was wondering, have you looked at all at like disaster capitalism? And if so, would you be able to talk about that at all?
I haven't I haven't researched it too much, but I do know like a lot of like home improvement stores do actually make a lot of money when natural disasters come around, and also like grocery stores as well. Like there's like when hurricanes come around and people go to like the grocery store and they like, raid the grocery store, kind of like what we saw with all the missing toilet paper for COVID. And that leads to like people, spiking up prices and selling them for themselves, like on eBay or on Amazon. And so that has, obviously that can disproportionately affect low-income people who can't afford these essential items.
And all right, and then have you also like looked at all into like gentrification issues that happen after natural disasters?
I haven't looked into it too much, but I know that like after Katrina, I know multiple like housing awards and housing projects in New Orleans like They either were not like funded at all, so there's a lot of them are still in disrepair, even 15 years after a Hurricane Katrina, or some of them were completely remodeled and like a different class of people or different race of people moved into the different housing projects and gentrified them.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, when I was thinking about disaster capitalism, that was kind of what I was getting at, was the kind of a lot of the gentrification that might happen after a natural disaster, where you have different corporations, and if you remember back to the income inequality slide that Thomas was showing you, we have really big disparities, and a lot of times people in that upper level, like they're waiting to kind of capitalize off of this natural disaster, and sometimes hopefully purchase areas of land where they can now, make that for somebody else to live there. So that's a whole kind of theory, disaster capitalism, that I would suggest people would kind of look into or research more if you want to learn kind of more about going a little bit more in depth than what Thomas was talking about. Well, Monica, looks like you have a question you wanted to ask.
I do. Thank you. I was going to wait. I didn't want to interrupt you again. I'm sorry. Thomas, great presentation. I did have a question for you. Did any of your resources talk about the mismanagement of land, like forestry services, clearing land, and then bringing individuals back in and possibly rebuilding in areas that continually that are continually destructed or anything of that nature? I was just kind of curious if you looked at the other side of that spectrum on those issues.
Not necessarily like the specific rebuilding process or from like the Forest Service or whatnot. I do know like with these are like, so like with the Build Back Better policies, like you can only like speculate because we don't have these policies in the United States. But like in other countries where they do have these policies, they do like try to focus on making sure that when communities do go back, that they're prepared for future disasters. So I guess is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, sort of. I was kind of curious because, I mean, we know that climate change is an issue. That's definitely, but there's also other factors that contribute to these types of things. For instance, in California, the mismanagement of forestry, not cleaning out areas, those things that exacerbate problems when you have a fire. And then, of course, there's been other videos that have shown people intentionally setting fires and things of that nature. So I was just curious if you kind of looked at the other side of that spectrum, because, sometimes local government may not manage the land or the property. You showed it fairly with the distribution of funds and things of that nature. It kind of goes across the board. It goes with, the political, the financial, all across the board. So I didn't know if you had looked into that too as well and just didn't find support. I was curious.
Yeah, I hadn't looked into like the specific local levels, I guess, of like how local communities, like specifically local governments, can impact, or prevent fires. But you're right, like a big portion of like public health and of like management of resources and administration of like federal funds are at the local level. So they do play a very big part in managing like preparedness and managing overall public health resources, I guess.
Well, again, thank you. Good presentation. I appreciate it. Very insightful.
Yes, thank you for your question.
All right, we have another question as well in the chat. Thomas, have you seen any research on policies that can be implemented to help buffer against natural disaster? So for instance, policies to counter sea level rise. And I think this question is sort of also kind of gets at what possibly a little bit of what Monica was talking about, is in relation to the fact that a lot of kind of human decisions or activities, such as like, building Houston on a swamp, and then continuing to remove wetlands, which would help buffer against some of those natural disasters and things like that, has led us to having these much greater impacts from things like Hurricane Harvey. So have you looked at any ways that we could help buffer against natural disasters?
Yeah, so like obviously climate change, like stopping climate change and like the encroachment of like and like the depletion of wildlife resources is obviously like a big factor. And preparing for natural disasters, like with the like increase and encroachment of like human societies on like wildlife lands, we are like seeing more and more contact with wild animals, and so that can also increase the likelihood of diseases like COVID-19 spreading from animals to people. And so those kinds of natural disasters also like go along with that, like making sure like we don't, we like save wildlife land and we protect that both for natural disaster reasons and for public health reasons. And like also like just preventing climate change in general is limiting fossil fuels use, preventing the rise of sea levels can protect a lot of coastal cities, and especially like they'll limit the impacts of hurricanes on those like coastal areas, especially in Florida and Houston.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. It looks like those are all the questions that we have for today. I'm just going to start sharing my screen real quickly here. I just want to show you all what we have coming up next. So again, thank you, Thomas. We have a really great info. Thank you, Thomas, in the chat. Someone said you made some great points. Someone else exclaimed that they had no idea about a lot of this information. So thank you so much for helping us all understand this a little bit better. And what we have coming up here for the future, if I can get the screen to show the one I want. Thomas, is it showing up next? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what we have coming up tonight, actually, from 6 to 9, there's going to be a documentary screening of The Condor and the Eagle. It's a really interesting documentary that looks at environmental justice issues. So it might follow up on some of the issues that Thomas has talked about here, give you some more real world kind of concrete examples possibly. And we also have, and that's free, and that's the whole state of Texas can participate in that. So you can register, you can see the link there. And there's also a discussion that will start at 7:30 after the film, where we'll have some panelists from some really interesting environmental justice organizations. And then tomorrow we have 2 presentations. So Lily is going to talk to us about intersectional environmentalism, and then Shreya is going to talk to us about colorism. And those are some topics that possibly some of y'all may not have really thought about in terms of sustainability. And it's a great way for you to just continue to expand your knowledge. So please join us later tonight and especially tomorrow for Texas A&M's events. We really appreciate y'all joining us. Thanks for your time. And the code word also is Harvey for this presentation. Harvey, I think there we go. So the code word for this presentation is Harvey. So make sure you collect that, write that down, and make sure to get your water bottle and your t-shirts. And we hope to see you tonight, and we hope to see you tomorrow. And please check out all of our events. Really appreciate your participation, and thanks for joining us today. Hope y'all have a great rest of your Thursday. Take care, everyone.